It is a great privilege, again, to be at St. Tikhon's. I know that all of you are trying to learn English very diligently. I'm trying to learn Russian very diligently. But today I will speak in English. There is another opportunity to hear the lecture in Russian at 5 o'clock today, but this morning in English. And I'm very pleased to be able to share with you some of the results of my research. When I was in Russia last year, a guest of your university for 9 months, conducting research about the rebirth of the Orthodox Church in Russia since the fall of communism. And today I would like to share with you some of the results of my research. These are still very preliminary results, and therefore I look forward to receiving your comments, your suggestions, your advice. Even though I have spent many months in Russia, I am, of course, an outsider. I do not ever know the circumstances as well as you do. And so I will be very pleased to hear from you this morning. Our plan will be that I will present some of my research to you for about 30 to 40 minutes, and then there will be the opportunity for you to make comments or to ask questions. And please, if there is something that you don't understand, if I have spoken too quickly or not precisely, then I'm very glad to try to clarify any of my points. Thank you to your professor for arranging for you to come today, and I look forward to our time together. When I began my project about the rebirth of the Orthodox Church in Russia over the last 20 years, I was very interested in two phenomena, in two questions. The first phenomenon that struck me was that the church in Russia seems to be growing at a time when the Christian churches in Western Europe and North America are in decline. How is this possible, I wondered to myself, that in Russia there are more parishes, more monasteries, more people coming to the churches at a time when in Europe and the United States there are many parishes closing, monasteries closing, fewer people coming into the churches. Why does the situation in Russia seem to be different? And then I had a second question related to a second phenomenon that made me very curious to continue my research. According to some sociological researchers, as you know, as many as 60% or perhaps even 80% of Russians call themselves Orthodox. But perhaps only 5% or at most 10% of Russians regularly come to the liturgy, receive the Eucharist, and are active in church life. And this also made me very curious. I wanted to understand, why is it that so many Russians call themselves Orthodox, but many of them never come to the church, or if they come, only very occasionally to light candles, or to have children baptized, or to come at Christmas or at Easter. But otherwise, they seem to keep their distance from the church. And this made me wonder, well, is the church in Russia truly growing? Is the church in Russia truly being reborn? On the outside, that appears to be the case. If we look at the number of parishes and monasteries and the presence of the church in social life, on the outside, the picture looks very positive and exceptional in comparison to the United States. But at the same time, is the church truly growing? Is it truly reestablishing itself in society if so few people actually participate regularly in church life? I had these two questions, these two curiosities, as I came as a guest to your university to conduct my research. Another way to put the intent, the purpose of my project is to say that I was interested in the question, well, I have to speak one word of Russian, воцерковление, because there's not a very good way to translate this word into English. I think in English, if we translated воцерковление literally, it would be in-churching, but this makes no sense in the English language. And so we have to talk about the process of incorporating people into church life. In English, it takes a few more words to say what is meant by the Russian word воцерковление. When your patriarch, Kirill, was enthroned 3 years ago, he said that воцерковление was a major task for the Orthodox Church today. Over 20 years since the fall of communism, churches have been rebuilt, parishes have been reopened, priests have been trained. There is space, there is opportunity now to invite Russians into the life of the Orthodox Church. And I want to know if this effort of воцерковление will succeed. Are there signs that there will be success? Are there signs that the 5 to 10% who regularly participate might become 15%, or 20%, or 25%? Or, on the contrary, will Russia continue to have this double identity in relationship to orthodoxy? Many people who call themselves Orthodox, but few who actually participate. I think that this is a very important question, not only for Russia, but also for world Christianity. The forces that are reshaping the world today, often what we call the forces of secularity or secularism. These forces that put emphasis on economic development, on material wealth, on the freedom of the individual personality to choose his or her way of life. These forces of secularity are at work both in the West and in Russia. And so it would be very significant for world Christianity if Russia and the Orthodox Church resisted the powers of secularity in a way that does not seem to be happening in Western Europe and the United States. I will share with you some of the results of my research, but in advance, tell you my preliminary conclusion. My preliminary conclusion is that the church in Russia as a social institution is growing, is exercising more influence. But we do not yet see clear evidence that воцерковление is widely succeeding. I may be mistaken, and you may wish to correct me, but these seem to be the preliminary results of my research. That if we look at the sociological surveys, there is not yet evidence that more people are actually being incorporated into active church life. Well, as I did my research, I was interested in 4 areas of church influence. In some of these areas, the church in Russia is doing things like the churches in the West. In other cases, there are differences, and we will talk about this comparison between Russia and especially the United States. But 4 areas in which the church is trying to advance воцерковление. The first area is through education. And I'll say a few words about that in a moment. The second area is through social ministry, social service. The third area is interpretation of history, especially the history of the 20th century and how Russians understand the tragic events of persecution of the church. And the fourth area that was of interest to me are efforts to strengthen parish life, to form community, община, in parishes. So allow me to say a few words about each of those 4 areas and some of my preliminary results. First, as I said, religious education. And of course, you already know much of what I will be talking about. You are well aware of these events. After Kirill became patriarch, he established that every parish have a Sunday school. This was one of his important initiatives, to promote religious education through Sunday schools. Another of his important initiatives was to require priests to conduct at least 3 conversations, 3 catechetical conversations with parents who wish to have their children baptized. This too was new, first established under Kirill, your patriarch, to encourage greater religious education so that parents understand what is happening when they bring their children to be baptized. Your own university, St. Tikhon's, is a very important example of the church's efforts to expand religious education. As I understand the mission of your university, as it is articulated by your rector, Vladimir Vorobyov, the purpose of St. Tikhon's is to train a new Orthodox elite, intelligentsia, people who will bring Orthodox values into Russian society, not only in the church, but as they work in companies, as translators, as researchers, as teachers. that in the secular, non-religious world, graduates of St. Tikhon's through religious education might help to bring Orthodoxy closer to the Russian people. Yet another example of religious education, and this is very unusual from an American point of view, but not so unusual from a European point of view, and that is the teaching of orthodoxy in the public schools. Now, I understand that this is not Zakon Boží, this is not the same as Sunday school, but it is now possible through the federal curriculum for children in the 4th and 5th grades to receive 30 hours of education in the foundations of Orthodox culture. All of these religious educational efforts are growing, are expanding, are reaching into Russian society so that people who call themselves Orthodox will become more truly Orthodox, so that Orthodoxy will not simply be a label or a cultural identifier, but that through religious education, people will come into active participation in the life of the church. There will be воцерковление. This at a time where religious education in the United States is not growing, where we find that many of our people in our parishes do not know the Christian faith well. They do not study the Bible. They do not read the Gospels. Again, my question, will Russia be different? Will Russia be an exception to what is happening in the West? But my preliminary conclusion is that it is still too early to tell. Again, the sociological research in recent years does not indicate that Russians as a whole have a better understanding of the foundations of the Orthodox faith. They may be more aware that orthodoxy exists. They may be more aware that orthodoxy is part of their culture. They may be more aware that orthodoxy has shaped the Russian nation. But apparently there is not yet clear evidence that these efforts in religious education are bringing more people into active participation. Воцерковление. When I was here last year, I attended an adult Sunday school class, an adult lecture series at Svято-Tihonský Monastery. Now, I'm sure all of you have been to Svято-Tihonský, and you know that it is a very active and exciting monastery where there are so many people on Sundays and on holidays that they spill into the courtyard. And we know about Archimandrit Tikhon and, of course, his book last year, which has been so successful. All of the efforts of Svято-Tihonský to also promote religious education. But at this adult Sunday school, at best, there would be 30 people. Now, that's not bad, but if you think that in the church, perhaps there will be up to 700 or 800, but only 20 to 30 of those adults are regularly receiving religious education, then it is not yet clear whether the efforts in religious education will succeed in bringing more people into a deeper, more active participation in the church's life. Let's talk now about the second area. of my research, social ministry, social service. Again, a little bit hard to translate exactly from the Russian, but I think you understand what I mean. Here, the church over the last 20 years, as you know, has developed amazing new opportunities to help people in need. Social ministry, of course, was forbidden during the Soviet era, but now, again, there are active church efforts to serve people who are hungry, who are poor, who are sick. When I was in Moscow, I was very impressed with the work of the Marfa Marinskaya Obitelj. And amazing, the efforts to train people to care for their elderly parents in their home, or to work with children who have autism, or there's an orphanage, there's a school for young girls. Many, many amazing social projects. Another social project that I got to know was in a parish along the Volga River, not far from Kinishma, where a group of monks in a rural parish have established a drug rehabilitation center. And I want to say a word about this drug rehabilitation center because I think it makes clear the connection between social service and воцерковление. Up to 8 young men from Moscow and St. Petersburg work and live with the monks for up to a year. These young men are in the second stage of their rehabilitation, and the purpose of their rehabilitation is to strengthen them so they will stay clean. They will stay away from narcotics when they return to their homes. And we know that this is a very serious problem with drug rehabilitation, that often people who go through drug rehabilitation continue to fall back into use of drugs after their rehabilitation. Well, one part of the rehabilitation at this rural parish is that the young men receive religious education, they participate in the liturgy, they help to sing the liturgy, they participate each day in the church's services, they keep the church's fasts. They're learning to live an orthodox way of life. Воцерковление is taking place in the hope that this воцерковление will give them the foundations to stay away from drugs when they return home. But it is also the case that there are volunteers who come to the monks to assist them in their work. There are volunteers from Moscow and St. Petersburg, Orthodox men and women, lay people, who want to help the monks and the young men who are recovering from addiction. And these volunteers will come and serve in the parish for a week or several weeks or even much of the summer, again, worshiping with the community, eating with the community, living together with the community. And these people, these volunteers, they say that this social ministry also deepens their faith, deepens their participation in the Orthodox Church. And so we might say that the purpose of Orthodox social ministry is to help to encourage воцерковление of those who receive the ministry, but also to encourage deeper воцерковление of those who are helping to give the ministry. And this could be a very exciting and important opportunity for the church to reach into Russian society and to bring more people into its life. My preliminary results confirm that the social ministries of the Orthodox Church are very impressive and are among the most important social service initiatives in Russia today. Often the church is doing much more than the government or other organizations. But we do not yet have evidence that this is translating into greater rates of overall participation in the church's life. We will still have to wait and see. All right, the third area that I mentioned to you of my research has to do with how we interpret the events of the 20th century, the years of communism, the years of persecution of the church. Here again, it seems to me that the church is doing exciting, important work to try to help Russians to understand what happened in the 20th century and how we should live today as a nation after these events. I don't need to rehearse for you the years of persecution, the extreme loss of people, of priests, the arrests, the executions. You already know all of this story. But what is interesting to me is how the church, through its historians and its memorial sites, its exhibitions. I believe there was one just this past year from St. Tikhon's, Stradania, I think was an important exhibit. This has been a very important part of the work of St. Tikhon's University to help Russians to understand two aspects of the 20th century. First of all, the events of the 20th century from the church's point of view demonstrate that at the time of the revolution, many Russians were not truly Orthodox. They called themselves Orthodox, even as they might call themselves Orthodox today. But if the nation had truly been an Orthodox nation in 1917, the Russian people never would have allowed the persecution that took place. And therefore today the Russian people and the Russian nation have an obligation to repent of the sins of their parents and grandparents and great-grandparents who did not stand up against the communist repression. But the story of the 20th century is also that out of persecution came new life. Out of persecution came the glory of God's presence in people who suffered for their faith, did not deny their faith, did not betray others, the people that we call the new martyrs. This also is a lesson of the 20th century from the church's point of view, that there were new martyrs, there were people. They were not many. They were the minority. But nevertheless, not everyone betrayed the church. There were people who remained steady. There were people in whom God shone his glory. And so today, the Russian people should honor the memory of the new martyrs. The new martyrs are not just for the church. They show all of Russia the way to rebirth after the years of communism. For me personally, it was very moving to visit places like Butava, Salafki, and more regional memorial sites where the church remembers these events of the 20th century, remembers that the nation must repent, and yet at the same time that we have the new martyrs to show us the way to church rebirth and to national rebirth. At the same time, it seems to me that the church's efforts to promote воцерковление through the revering of the new martyrs, the veneration of the new martyrs, up to now still has limited results. Many ordinary Russians, I've been told, know very little about the new martyrs. They may know that there are new martyrs, but they have not been to Budava. They may not even know what Budava is. Moreover, again, I've been told, and you can correct me, but many people, many Orthodox who are not well incorporated into church life, when they come to light a candle or to ask for a saint to help them, they're more apt to turn to a well-known saint, someone whom they think can help them find luck or happiness or health. They want a reliable saint like Saint Nicholas or Saint Panteleimon, more than they turn to the new martyrs to help them. Well, finally, the fourth area of my research had to do with efforts to strengthen parish life. Because if people are going to be incorporated into church life, they need to have a parish where there is a strong feeling of community, of община, where you're not just a stranger, but you are welcomed into the community and its way of life. So today it seems to me there are many efforts in Orthodox parishes, especially in big cities like Moscow, to strengthen the feeling, the phenomenon of община in the parish. In some of these efforts, the Russian Orthodox Church is doing things that churches in the West have already done for many years. Organizing a time to drink coffee or tea after the liturgy, where people can simply talk and get to know each other and enjoy each other's company. It seems to me that it might also be the case that community today is being encouraged by encouraging people to participate more regularly in the Eucharist. It's very interesting to me that in many of the big parishes in Moscow, the priests encourage people to take the Eucharist, to receive it, almost every week, at least once a month, and in some cases, almost every week. And so in the parish that we attended in Moscow, often 200 or 300 people would come forward and receive the Eucharist every Sunday. And perhaps this is also a way of affirming our community, our община together as one church in Christ. Often it seems to me that even the educational efforts of the church, the Sunday schools, that their result, their success is more in the area of community than education. So again, I think of the class that I attended at Sretensky, This was a place where the 20 or 30 people who came had a community of people that they cared for. They looked forward to seeing each other every week. They asked about each other's problems. If somebody wasn't present, they'd say, well, where is Yulia today? Where is Vyacheslav this week? They wanted to have община together. Of course, to form community in that way takes time. It also depends a great deal on the priest. If the priest is always busy, if the priest does not like other people, if the priest is inaccessible, then it can be hard for the congregation, the parish, to build a sense of community. But if the parish has a priest who is open to other people, who reaches out to them, who shows that he cares about their personal problems, then this can do a great deal to encourage a feeling of community within the parish as a whole. And again, I don't need to tell you that there are several parishes in Moscow, including the Church of the University, St. Nicholas, the Kuznetsach, where there is very active participation of many lay people in many educational and social projects, where there is a strong sense of community and caring for each other. There are very amazing examples of the success of building community. But at the same time, my preliminary results suggest that such parishes reach only a small percentage of Russians, and only a small percentage of those Russians who call themselves Orthodox. There are not yet enough parishes, there are not yet enough priests to give time to people and their personal problems. The Orthodox Church is still, in many ways, at the beginning of building and strengthening parish life. So, as I come to my conclusion, I think you can see that I am still trying to understand exactly what is happening in Russia today. On the one hand, the influence of the church in society is growing. The church, through its educational efforts, through its social ministries, through its interpretation of the history of the 20th century, through parish life, is reaching out, is touching, is making more Russians aware of the vitality and the beauty of orthodoxy and the Orthodox tradition. Everywhere a Russian goes today, he or she is going to encounter the Orthodox Church and Orthodox values and Orthodox ways of thinking. When I was here last year, it was at the time of the revering, the venerating of the belt of the Virgin Mary, the poyas, in the Church of Christ the Savior Cathedral. And as you know, over the course of 6 weeks throughout Russia, more than 3 million Russians lined up. And here alone in Moscow, more than 800,000. And you remember how the lines were so long that they went as far from the church as to Park Kultury. And some of those days were cold and rainy, and people were standing sometimes for 12 or 15 or 20 hours. Well, when something like that happens, it's clear that orthodoxy is part of Russia, that we can't understand Russia without also understanding the important place of orthodoxy in Russia. The presence of the church, the activity of the church is becoming more and more well known. That's the one side. The other side is the sociological research that says over the last 10 years, there has not been much growth. Particular parishes may be growing. Particular monasteries may be growing. But overall, the larger picture in Russia is one of stability, perhaps slow growth in church life, but nothing very dramatic yet. And of course, part of the events of last year were not only the venerating of the poyas, but also the street demonstrations, the protests, attacks on the church, attacks on the patriarch, which remind us that there are other parts of Russian society that do not like the church, do not support the church, whose values are shaped not by orthodoxy, but by other world views. And so it seems to me that today in Russia, the picture is still very unclear, very unstable. My hope, my initial interest had been how the church in Russia is growing at a time that the churches in the West are declining. But at this point in my research, I come to the conclusion that in Russia itself, the picture is very complicated. There are signs of growth, there are signs of new influence and vitality in the church. There are also signs of resistance and indifference, and we do not yet know what the future will bring. As I turn to you, I'm especially interested in how you interpret these events and interested in how young people in Russia today think about the church. What will the next generation think about the church? Will people in your generation call themselves Orthodox? If they call themselves Orthodox, will they participate in the life of the church? Or will the Orthodox Church find that it too is a minority, like the churches in the West, a church in the minority in a society whose values are deeply shaped by popular culture, by globalization, by secular forces? Thank you very much for your attention. I look forward to your questions.